Austin Faith Dialogue, a public affairs series at the crossroads of religion and life. Austin Faith Dialogue highlights the interaction of the religious community with the social and cultural issues in the area in and around the capital city. Austin Faith Dialogue is brought to you by Austin Metropolitan Ministries in cooperation with KTBC TV. Join us now for this week's edition of Austin Faith Dialogue. Conflict management is more than a catchphrase of our time. Rather, it's a movement across the nation to provide means of dispute resolution, which turns conflict into constructive rather than destructive uses. Hello, I'm Richard Thompson, pastor of Central Presbyterian Church, and your host for this edition of Austin Faith Dialogue. And today we have the unique opportunity to highlight the work of Austin leaders in conflict management. Their influence extends throughout this country, indeed abroad. They are Carl and Diane Slaikeus. Carl is a psychologist and she is an attorney, and both are mediators here in Austin. Among his various publications, Dr. Slaikeus authored the book Ashes: How to Survive and Grow Through Personal Crises. He also edited and was, in fact, the author to Crisis Intervention, Handbook for Practice and Research. In 1982, he founded, and for the past 10 years has served as president of CORDA Conflict Management Incorporated. Diane Slaikeus is a partner in the firm of Owsley and Slaikeus here in Austin, a member of the Association of Family Reconciliation Courts, as well as the Society of Professionals in Dispute Resolution. They're both active church members, and we welcome you both.
Thank you.
I want you to make sure I got the name of your firm correctly. But
you were correct.
Okay, and you are in practice of general civil law?
Civil practice, yes. Increasingly doing more mediation work and trying to resolve disputes.
I think that I know what it was. I said reconciliation is conciliation in the court
Family
system.
and conciliation courts, yes. There are a number of national entities that are focusing more on this aspect of dispute resolution.
Well, I think that we hope some reconciliation occurs in that as well.
That's true. In church disputes, certainly.
Right. And Carl, I think that I have to admit that before I came to Austin, I had heard about your book, The Phoenix Factor, translated into German and Dutch at later time, and Up from the Ashes is a kind of more recent version of that.
It's a paperback version of that book. They changed the title, as they sometimes do.
And Up from the Ashes has to do with personal crises, making the best of that.
Right.
And then you wrote about crisis intervention. How did you get to conflict management through all of that?
Well, crisis and conflict management somehow seemed related to me over the years. I had been working as a psychologist in the area of crisis intervention, and then in the late 70s I began learning about mediation of disputes and started looking at divorce mediation, did some research on that, and then began applying some of the same models from crisis intervention research to conflict management. And so for about 10 or more years now I've been involved in mediation. I've just a whole range of conflicts.
Seems to me mediation as a movement in the nation is about 10 years in terms of public consciousness. I'm sure it's been going on longer than that, but as a movement, isn't it about a decade?
Many people point to the mid-70s as a time when people began borrowing models that had been used up to that point in labor management mediation and in international mediation, applying these models to family crises, to family situations, to insurance and commercial disputes, to organizational disputes. The concept itself, as you know, has been around for a long time. It's at least as old as the New Testament, and it's very prevalent in many other cultures. But in our country, people typically have thought of labor management and international until about the mid-70s, and now it's been called by some the sleeping giant of dispute resolution. It's such a powerful and new method.
Well, I think it'd be helpful. Just let's make the assumption that mediation is sort of a new thing to some of us. And Diane, I know lawyers think logically. Just 1, 2, 3. Give us the outline
the
of
logical
mediation process here.
Well, as a part of your question, let me sort of approach it in the way that when I graduated from law school, I was very aware that the training I received there seemed to more emphasize winning in the courtroom and winning disputes. There was supposedly a win-loss that was to emerge. And when I started thinking about that with real-life situations, there was something missing. So when I heard, after graduating from law school at the University of Texas in 1976, hearing soon after that of the emergence of mediation being applied to certain kinds of legal disputes, I was very interested.
I see.
Most of the legal community was not interested. Some felt threatened by it, I'm quite sure. Others just didn't have information about what it meant. But I immediately grasped it as a concept I wanted to learn more about, became trained in a training program in Atlanta in the early 80s, and when we moved back to Austin, I've been trying to incorporate that more and more in my professional practice, and also it's translated into work I've done in the church on committees and sessions and so
Okay.
forth.
Well, whether it's in the legal domain or in the church setting, give us if you had in 2 minutes to say what mediation is and how it works, you're on.
All right. Mediation is the assistance of a neutral third party to help two or more disputing parties resolve a conflict. You don't, as a mediator, make a decision for the parties. You simply are a facilitator to help them reach agreement on some issue or issues. And rather than using the traditional, let me show you my position over here, and then the other side responding, let me show you my position and all of these reasons, rather you search as a mediator to help them find what is driving the dispute, what are the underlying interests behind these positions, and in attempts in joint meetings and private caucus sessions, in identifying those interests, a mediator tries to help see, is there a path out of this dispute that can lead to some reconciliation or at least some resolution of the conflict.
Okay, so instead of just kind of lapsing into the usual antagonistic mindset and mode,
Right.
it is to deliberately set up a means by which people can see it's to their interests to work it out in a less than hostile
That's
way.
the attempt, and it takes a lot of time, energy, creativity. You use a lot of techniques to try to make it happen. People become entrenched, and you try to get them off of their entrenched positions and to start thinking in another frame of reference.
Okay. Sounds like counseling in a way, Carl. I mean,
Well, you know, it
same
may sound like
principles?
that, though it's not. Counseling has a goal of healing for people and personal growth. In mediation, the goal is very clear, and it's very different. It's to help these two or more people reach agreement on something, so that if it's 2 people or 5 people or 2 large entities represented by negotiators who have constituencies. We've done mediations, for example, involving health care organizations. We have a large group here and a large group here. It's a matter of helping them reach agreement. Building on what Diane said, the heart of what a mediator does, and this might be very interesting to the listeners, is that the mediator will, in private caucuses, and by that we mean once you've got them together, you structure the ground rules, and then you meet with each privately, and you ask about what I call matters of the heart, things that they need that they often will not reveal to the adversary for good reason. They're fearful it will be used against them.
Right.
A good friend and colleague of ours at Northwestern University, Steve Goldberg, wrote an article some years back in the American Bar Journal where he said, he tried to answer the question, how does a mediator get a different result than just 2, say, attorneys negotiating head-to-head? And his answer is the one that we all give, which is that the mediator in these private caucuses is going to hear things that the parties won't say to the other person. Therefore, the mediator has a different data set with which to try to fashion a solution for people. Now, you can't do it for them, but you're a coach, you're a facilitator, and you try to structure this to help them get what they each need. And if it doesn't work, of course, they can do their alternatives. They can go to court, they can go to war, they can live with the pain.
Right,
These are always alternatives, but the other is the goal.
But hopefully to help them see that their interest is to avoid the court and the pain and...
Well,
That's
it's a very...
often emerges as one of the key interests
Right.
when they realize.
Well, I think that one of the things, too, that comes to mind is how when you're getting these folks to, confide in you as the mediator, and you're not doing this just like your confession sort of thing,
Right.
but to put into play the forces that will help them see that there is less pain in coming to an amicable setting than to go on in another direction.
Right.
And I think that the fact that you do this not only with the church, but I would guess most of the time you're spending most of your time working with health organizations or legal...
That's right.
Yes.
What are some of the various areas that you apply this to?
my company, Core to Conflict Management, is involved. We do mediation in a wide range of situations. We do training in mediation and conflict management for managers and for people who face conflict every day. And we help companies set up systems that will make better use of mediation. But we've done a lot of work in healthcare, in hospitals, health maintenance organizations, in the construction industry, in manufacturing, and in insurance. We've then applied these models to churches as well. We're involved in a project now with our church. We're Presbyterians, where it's a sort of a stewardship of our time. We've done it together. We've taught a 40-hour course to people who are a part of that church, who are mediators, that they can now mediate church disputes.
All right. I'd like to come back to that in a moment, because, you know, church dispute seems like a contradiction in terms. You're supposed to
we don't have conflict.
Have the fellowship of Christian love kind of thing, and the fact is it's not that way. And how you make a difference we'd like to come to. But just very briefly, Diane, just to round off the process within the legal profession, I know that one of the reasons that Judge Aylshire locally was given an appreciation certificate by the Dispute Resolution Center here in town was that it helped unclog the courts.
Yes.
And is that your perception of it as well?
I think definitely that's an interest that judges and court administrators have, and that is an outcome. There are other things happening in the community to encourage the peaceful resolution of disputes. The Civil Remedies Code was amended in 1987 on a statewide basis to encourage the peaceful resolution of disputes. So now that judges can order parties to mediation or other alternative kinds of dispute resolution. We have Settlement Week coming up next week. They're volunteer mediators. They're all attorneys who are going to be giving their time.
Which helps raise the level of consciousness
Certainly
about this
does,
process.
which is an important thing.
Okay, well, we're going to take a short break here, and then when we come back on Austin Faith Dialogue, we'll continue our discussion on conflict management. Please stay with us.
Serving Austin means serving you. Each day, Austin Metropolitan Ministries is religion in action, providing affordable housing, caring for the elderly, marching against hunger, and much more. AMM promotes understanding, cooperation, and social involvement. So when we ask for your help, we're really asking to help you, Austin. To find out how you can help Austin Metropolitan Ministries help Austin through its member organizations, just call 472-7627.
We're back on Austin Faith Dialogue as we continue our discussion of conflict management with Carl and Diane Slaikeus. Let's pick it up about the church in conflict, which is, earlier we were indicating some people think shouldn't ever go together. And I understand that you have some perspective on the church side of things. Carl, could you share that with us?
Well, I think I mentioned to you before the program, my first exposure that I can recall, I guess, to full-blown conflict was in our home. My dad was a Baptist preacher, and I used to listen to one half of these disputes as he was on the phone with somebody. And so as I try to look back and say, where did I first get interested in this topic, I'm sure that's a part of it. These days, we both do work in mediation and training of church disputes in addition to the others that are a part of our regular work. And when we do training, I tell people, and I think Diane probably agrees, that the toughest disputes that we face are family disputes involving divorce and church disputes. They're right up there at the top.
Yes.
And the others pale by comparison as far as I'm concerned. And it seems to be that, that the issues in church disputes go so deeply to people's values and to what they care about. And also, people who are part of churches often know that they are a walking contradiction as they deal with their disputes. There's a huge theological mandate for reconciliation and forgiveness and a biblical tradition there. And, you know, our lives often go quite counter to that. And then if you put the whole focus around a church building or the parlor that my aunt decorated, or, you know, it gets very practical and very concrete, or the budget, a lot of reasons for this. But they're very difficult disputes.
They're personal reasons. People get emotionally involved with church kinds of things like they do family sorts of things.
Of course, they get emotionally involved in medical malpractice and in construction disputes as well, but there's something about this institution where people live and get their spiritual grounding that it all seems to come out.
Well, let's focus on that for a minute. I mean, you see this, Diane, from the standpoint of kind of par for the course in the courts. I mean, that's what courts are, to settle disputes, hopefully without weapons.
Right.
But the church, just at the opposite end of the spectrum, you're as a layperson, as one who is offering your professional skills to congregations. What kinds of problems can you categorize them?
I can perhaps give you some examples of types that I've been involved in. Actually, in terms of knowledge of people who have as their only option the model of going to the court, I'm aware of several church disputes where people first went to the attorney because they didn't have any other mechanism within the church that they thought would hear their concerns, their interests.
So you know of cases that have actually been taken to court?
Yes, yes, where that's the beginning point. And a part of what we're trying to do is in the educational process to help people understand that churches need to have internally systems whereby they know that there are other avenues to try to resolve the disputes. So that's a side issue, but it's a very common thing that people immediately run to an advocate outside the church, perhaps. The kinds of other disputes that I've been involved in are personnel disputes, pastors, choir directors, choir factions within the church, disputes within sessions or other governing bodies concerning priorities, budget items, benevolences versus a new plant, a new addition to churches. Those are fairly common disputes, and when Carl and I have been involved in some training of ministers, I think regionally, when we mention the kinds of things or ask them for the kinds of disputes they've been involved in trying to resolve or even personally been involved in, those kinds of issues come up over and over again.
Okay, well let's just kind of go with that. In terms of you have just ongoing differences within a church about the budget or about, you know, they call the choir the war department of the church. And this is presumably can be handled by, you know, fair-minded, you know, decent human beings are trying to do the best thing for not in themselves but for each other. Okay. However, it doesn't always turn out that way, and so let's, in addition to these examples of the kinds of issues, let's now take it, you get folks together, and then how do you lead them toward, you know, recognizing the inevitability of conflict and the ways and means of working it through? Just, can you give us some examples of that?
There are a couple of ways, obviously. People can have direct talks with one another. In the literature, they call these direct negotiations. But often that breaks down for the reasons we talked about before the break, that they will not disclose to one another what's really going on.
Okay.
And so a mediator will convene the parties, whether it's 2 or more or 5 or whatever, and then do private caucuses to try to understand first what are their interests, what do they need,
okay. Well,
where
let's
is the hurt?
say the interests in the church, without disclosing any, you know, any confidences here. Just give us some examples of how you would apply that to a church.
Well, you might talk to a choir director, for example, who's in a dispute with the head pastor over the fact that he or she hasn't been given the freedoms to run the choir the way that person would like to do. There could be people in the choir who want a different kind of music for different reasons. There could be someone who bought or put some money in to decorate the parlor that's trying to honor the memory of a dead relative, and therefore has a big stake in what's going on, but maybe doesn't have the communication skills to deal openly with some of these people. So
all right, well, do you help churches set up mediation committees? I mean, what's the structure?
Well, our view is that churches should have a range of mediation options available. Right now, they might know about them through the community or in the church, but they typically don't know about them. So, for example, in our church, we've set up a whole range of mediation possibilities, that we've trained lay people to mediate church disputes. There are people all over our communities, lawyers, therapists, business people, educators who've had training in mediation, some through the local dispute resolution centers, others through companies like ours. They go to these churches. So in one case, we took 20 of them, in fact, 2 cases, once in Houston, once in Austin. We took 20 of them, put them through another 40-hour training program that's geared toward church matters, and they now are available in these churches to go in as teams to mediate disputes if the parties want them. So that's a systemic mechanism to bring a mediator to bear on a situation. You can trigger it with a contract clause. Ministers, as you know, or pastors have signed things called terms of call, the conditions under which they serve. But you have, well, we're looking now at putting in a mediation clause in a terms of call that says, essentially, if we have a problem, first we'll talk, and second, if we can't work it out to our mutual satisfaction, we'll use a mediator. Now, that's built after clauses used in business and industry. For example, Motorola has a mediation clause in their contracts with outside parties that says essentially the same thing.
Okay.
So it's taking this model that's used elsewhere and saying, what is the church version of it? and how might it be used? Yeah.
If you shift the perspective just a bit from the local church to a denominational structure like our presbytery,
Yes.
in the Presbyterian Church, how do you systematize that?
Well, one of the things that we're doing as a part of this project, our mediators that we've trained are available in Central and South Texas to go into any congregation that they're asked to come into to resolve a dispute. So it's not only built-in mechanisms within a congregation, but it's mechanisms within a broader area. So for example, if people in a congregation believe we don't have anybody here we would really want or trust to resolve our own dispute, these people are available from outside, but not really outside because they're still within the church.
They're part of the family in a larger sense.
Yes.
Okay, so that you can let it be known that there are people who've had this training that are available to go from Austin to Brownsville.
Right, and that's exactly what they've been doing.
Okay, well that's helpful, and I think that's new information for some of us, that you've got the church in a broader sense that can offer itself as an alternative to people just fighting it out on the home front in a destructive way, or going to court, or some other more conventional way.
And if I might say, all of this assumes that people always have the option to go to court if this doesn't work, or go to their higher governing body within the church. Nobody takes those options away, and I think that's very important, because this is not to replace other kinds of dispute resolvers.
It's to help them recognize that there are consequences if they follow these laws.
Certainly, for any avenue they follow.
Yeah.
When we teach this, we talk about 4 ways to resolve a dispute. You can avoid it and hope it'll go away. You can engage in power plays, acts of war, acts of violence, strikes, demonstrations. Dietrich Bonhoeffer engaged in a power play during World War II on a plot to assassinate Hitler.
Right.
There are higher authority resolutions through the courts, and then there are these collaborative methods we're talking about right now of negotiation and mediation. People have a right to choose. That's the concept. But typically, in our churches and our businesses, the collaborative part's fairly weak. A lot of people don't know how to talk to one another, and they don't know where to get a mediator if they want one.
Yeah.
So the systems idea is to say, there are these choices. You can avoid it, have power plays or higher authority or collaboration, but can we so wire our organizations that the collaborative opportunities are there when people need them? That's the concept.
Well, you know, the collaborative model, the mediation approach, is something which, I thought of this earlier, and I want to come back to it just briefly, and that is, in the legal profession, my guess is there might have been some initial suspicion of this because you can't make as much money on mediation as you can litigation. How can you make a profit if you're going to be reconciling? And
well, and I think initially that was a concern. I mean, obviously that's an interest of some people in that profession. But over the years, I think there's been an evolving understanding that the profession is changing, and that's because of consumer interest and just more awareness of what's happening in dispute resolution. Some people believe, and I'm probably one of those people, that litigation is probably going to be less often utilized as the sole means of dispute resolution for attorneys, as more attorneys are trained as mediators and now billing their time as mediators. So even economically, many of them are seeing, I really don't have that much to lose, and hopefully some of the other advantages of mediation and outcomes of disputes resolved through that process.
It reminds me a little bit about the debate currently going on. If you're environmentally responsible and pursuing good ecological practices, does that eventually create more jobs than it costs, sort of thing? And it seems to me if you make the assumption that to handle dispute resolutions in a creative form will pay off in a variety of ways.
Certainly.
If not immediately, certainly over the long run.
I think so. When we give talks on this, and we do a lot of that with law schools and for continuing education and for other professions, we talk about mediation as both a social skill that children are learning now for playground disputes, but it's also an emerging professional discipline.
Oh, really? You teach it? Will pay off in a variety of ways.
Certainly.
If not immediately, certainly over the long run.
I think so.
Inhabited mainly by immigrants.
There's a child analog of what we go through as adults, and the same 4 methods I talk about for resolving disputes apply to kids, and they teach them the conflict manager T-shirts and the whole 9
Yeah.
yards for how you get a couple. They put them through a program. They can walk up to a dispute or a fight that's brewing, or they can be invited in, and they learn those skills. So it's a social skill that we like people to build into their lives, but it's also an emerging professional discipline where attorneys are doing it and there are professional mediators.
Well, let's just hold to the children for a minute, because I think if you begin to inculcate that whole mindset at an early enough age, then that helps create the climate for the future.
Certainly.
And we might even be able to do a program sometime just on having some kids on here to say how they've worked things out.
There, you've got kids in this town. I'm sure you could get to be on that program, because they're excellent training programs that have begun and have been carried out. It's one of the more hopeful parts of this whole movement.
Yeah. Do you do work with the school district here?
Yes. Well, I've not with this school district, but our colleagues in town have worked with the school district, and I've done some training for teachers. I shouldn't say I haven't done that, but not a formal program. Most people involved in mediation really love the part of it that applies to children, and find a way either through volunteer work or through programs that to help train teachers, administrators, and children to apply this.
My guess is that once the kids learn how to do it, they have some things to teach us.
Absolutely.
Yes.
We've just got a couple of minutes left, but there are a couple of biblical things that just come to this mind that thinks in these terms. And one is when you talked about the, what was it, the day that all the attorneys can volunteer?
Oh, Settlement Week.
Settlement Week. It reminds me in the Hebrew Scriptures of Jubilee, when there's all of a sudden a kind of a public way of lots of people getting involved in reconciliation.
I think that would be a wonderful thing to remind church members of.
And within the legal profession, a recognition that this is a creative option that will grow increasingly. And on the Christian scriptures about, don't go to court with your disputes. Before you get there, work things out.
Go to one another. That's the
Yeah.
concept. The people who work in church mediation build on that. That the court is an alternative, but go to one another first and use sometimes a mediator or a third party, a member of the church, to help you work it out. That's the biblical root for much of the systems
if you've
work
got
these
that
days.
kind of support, then how can you go wrong? I mean, that's great. And is it true, I read somewhere that you went to Princeton Theological Seminary?
Right. Buried in my background is a theology degree. I then went back into psychology. I went there on a trial year fellowship for a year and then stayed and got a lot out of it, so got a degree, but then I went back into psychology after that.
Well, your mixture of faith and practice is one that really has been very enlightening and insightful. And I'd like to thank both Diane and Carl Slaikeus for being with us today.
Thank you for having us.
And we're glad that you folks happened to look in, and invite you to be with us again next week on another edition of Boston Faith Dialogue. I'm Richard Thompson, and peace be with you.